In a quiet town in Oregon, during a solemn funeral, a wild Mustang burst through the stillness, its hooves crashing onto the coffin of the man who once saved it. When the wooden lid split open, no one could believe their eyes, because what came from inside was the cry of a baby. A story too surreal to be true, yet it left hundreds in tears. Red Bluff wasn't on any tourist map. There was nothing there to make anyone stop, except a couple of rusted gas pumps, a general store that opened 3 days a week, and a few rows of silent wooden houses lining Highway 74. In the fall, leaves blanketed the red dirt paths, and the dry wind blew dust around like spirits that had fallen asleep in the open fields. Life there moved like an old country song, slow, sorrowful, and already known by heart. Walt McKinley lived on the outskirts of town, where the land was so barren even cactus hesitated to grow. A weathered wooden house baked in sun-bleached paint, a few rows of wilting bok choy, and a handful of scruffy hens too lazy to lay eggs. That was all he had left after 68 years of life. He'd once been a forest ranger, a tall man with ash-gray eyes and hands hardened by decades of wildfire seasons. But after his wife's death and the final argument that drove his only daughter Ellie away for good, Walt folded into himself like a broken branch. From that day on, he lived like a shadow. No TV, no radio, no internet, only the sound of wind, the occasional crow of a lonely chicken, and every morning at dawn, Walt drank his coffee alone on the porch, staring in the direction Ellie had gone. Then, on a still noon with smoke-thin clouds drifting across his ranch, came the urgent sound of footsteps breaking the lull. Bo Radley, the young neighbor in his 20s who often bartered fresh veggies for eggs, came running, shouting, "Mr. Walt, something's happened out by the creek." Walt set down his coffee on the weather-warped table and stood up slowly, as if his body too was unsure. "What is it, Bo?" "A horse, a foal. It's down by the water, barely alive. No one knows where it came from. There's a gash on its leg, and its eyes. God, you've got to see its eyes." Walt frowned. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a stray or abandoned Mustang, but something in Bo's voice, more than alarm, almost choked, made him pause. "Take me to it." The two made their way toward the western creek bed, where the stream now trickled feebly over bone-dry stones. Walt had once pitched tents there during long patrol weeks. Now, overgrown brush swallowed what used to be trails. And there, beneath a bare, leafless bush, lay the horse. No, not quite a horse. A Mustang foal, barely a year old. Its coat was matted in mud and dried blood, a sickly shade of ashen gray. It lay on its side, hind legs curled inward, ribs jutting out like they were ready to break through skin. But it was the eyes, wide open, black as midnight, bottomless like a moonless night, that made Walt freeze. No whinny, no struggle. Just those eyes, looking at him like a question, like a memory that had once been buried. "Good Lord," Walt whispered, kneeling slowly. "Why did you come here?" Bo fumbled with the loose rope knotted around the foal's neck, his gaze locked on the trembling little body. "I think someone tied it up and left it. Maybe its leg is broken." Walt slid his hand beneath its neck, feeling the faint, barely there breath. It was still alive. He looked down at its narrow muzzle, its folded ears like weary wings, and gently lifted it into his arms. It was so light it broke his heart, like holding a fading soul in his hands. "What are you going to do?" Bo asked. "Bring it home." "But what if it doesn't make it?" Walt stood, his eyes steely. "As long as its eyes are open, I'm not leaving." Bo said nothing more. They walked back in silence. The foal didn't stir, but its eyes, those eyes, never left Walt's face. Back at the ranch, Walt laid the foal in the old shed his wife once used for their donkey. He spread fresh straw, fetched clean water with a pinch of salt, and gently wiped the caked dirt and dried blood from its coat. He didn't go inside that whole afternoon. He sat by the shed, back against a post, listening to the foal's shallow breaths, each one like the final ticks of a clock running out. Before dusk, Walt said softly, "I'll call you Dusty, because of your color, and because you came from somewhere nobody remembers." The foal stirred, just slightly, but enough to make Walt feel he wasn't entirely alone anymore. As night fell and the cold wind slipped through wooden cracks, Walt stayed in his folding chair, a threadbare blanket across his knees, eyes never leaving Dusty. He knew the foal's life hung by a thread, but it felt like the last thread tying him to something good in this world. In that forgotten valley, an old man and a dying Mustang locked eyes, and in that silent moment, something unseen began to shift. Dusty lay still through the night, curling now and then as if trying to hold on to the last scraps of warmth. Walt sat beside the stall, wrapped in an old wool blanket up to his neck, eyes never leaving the young Mustang, as though if he blinked, it might vanish like a morning dream. Outside, wind whistled through thin pines and rattled the wood walls with whispers from the past. Just as the morning light turned the fog silver, Walt opened the stall door, carrying a bucket of warm water in one hand and a tin of milk mixed with honey in the other. He knelt beside Dusty, carefully bringing the spoon to its lips. At first, Dusty didn't react. Its eyes were open but distant, like they floated somewhere far away. Walt didn't give up. Slowly, steadily, he let one drop at a time fall against its mouth. These were the same hands that had once faced wildfires, braved mountain blizzards, now trembling from age and a fear he hadn't felt in decades, the fear of losing something he didn't yet understand why he needed. "It's okay, kid," he whispered. "No rush. Just keep breathing." Then, in a fragile instant, Dusty flicked its tongue across the spoon, just barely, but it was enough to make Walt's chest clench, something warm and aching blooming in his ribs. He let out a long breath, almost a sob. Bo returned mid-morning, carrying a bag of grain and some old blankets to make bedding. "You haven't slept, have you?" Bo asked, worry etched on his face. "Didn't dare," Walt said, eyes still fixed on Dusty. "It's fighting to live. I can't look away." Bo leaned against the stall door, watching silently. Dusty was still weak, but its breathing was steadier now. And those eyes, those bottomless black eyes, seemed to have caught a flicker of light. "Maybe you should call animal control," Bo suggested hesitantly. "Or a vet. I mean, if it's not gonna—" Walt looked at him. The wariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something clear, like waking from a long sleep. "As long as its eyes are open, I'm staying." Bo nodded, lowering his head. "Sorry, I just was trying to be realistic." Walt's voice dropped, deeper and steadier. Sometimes reality is what kills the best things. That afternoon, Walt used a warm rag to clean the crusted blood from Dusty's leg. Each time he touched a wound, the foal flinched, but never fought, as if it knew this man meant no harm. By evening, Walt had placed an oil lamp in the stall, added more straw, and gently draped an old yellow blanket, Joanna's favorite from their camping trips, over Dusty's thin frame. He leaned back against the beam, watching the flickering light dance across the foal's soft coat. It was strangely peaceful. No wind, no insects, just the slow, steady rhythm of two beings. One man, one Mustang, coexisting in a world everyone else had forgotten. Days passed. Dusty began to lift its head on its own. It couldn't stand yet, but it nosed its way to the water bowl, even let out a faint, high-pitched whinny when it heard Walt's footsteps outside. The first sound it had made like a greeting. Walt froze, then smiled, his first true smile in years. Bo witnessed it. The young man stood at the stall door, shovel in hand, frozen in place. He looked at Walt, then the fragile Mustang shifting on the straw, and whispered, "Lord, you're really pulling it back from death, aren't you?" Walt turned. His eyes no longer belonged to a lonely old man, but to someone awakened from a decades-long slumber. "No," he said, "it's pulling me back." That night, Bo brought a small camping tent and pitched it in the yard, so he could stay a few nights and help care for Dusty. They took turns keeping watch. Bo stoked the fire. Walt mixed medicine. They shared stories. Bo about his first time camping, Walt about the trip when Ellie nearly fell off a cliff just before Joanna died. At first, the stories were broken pieces, but together they became something like belief. That maybe, just maybe, broken things could be mended. One morning, before the sun was fully up, Dusty tried to stand. Its legs wobbled like mismatched strings on an old guitar, but it tried anyway. Bo and Walt stood frozen. Dusty took one step, then fell. But it didn't stay down. It pushed itself up again, front legs bracing, ears perked, eyes bright. "Bo," Walt whispered. "You see that?" Bo nodded, speechless. Dusty stood for 5 seconds, then 10, then collapsed again. But this time, its head didn't fall. It lifted, staring straight at Walt. It wasn't the look of a helpless creature. It was the gaze of a fighter. And Walt understood. Something in that light was calling him back to life. Dusty stood up on the 13th morning. No one had been keeping count exactly, but Walt knew. He had felt every moment tick by since the day the foal first collapsed in his arms by the creek. Since the day Red Bluff awoke to something like hope, carried quietly in the scent of old straw and the wind sweeping down from the ridge, Walt had changed. Not in the way he walked or spoke. Those were still slow, rough, and weathered like the land he lived on. But people noticed it in his eyes. Bo was the first to say it out loud. "You look like you finally pulled something off your chest," Bo said one morning as he poured feed into the chicken trough. "Maybe it was a curse," Walt replied, eyes on Dusty, who was slowly pacing the yard like he'd lived there all his life. Dusty didn't stumble anymore. His steps were still unsure, but stronger with each passing day. He followed Walt to the field, stood by the fence as the old man hoed the dirt, and sometimes leaned his head against Walt's shoulder. A gesture so tender that Walt, unfamiliar with softness, found himself unable to pull away. One October afternoon, Walt pulled a worn leather journal from the bottom drawer of his old desk. It was the journal he had kept for Ellie when she was little, filled with springtime memories, her first ride on a horse, and the night she cried because she couldn't catch a firefly. The last entry was dated the night before their final argument. Ellie had screamed in the living room, her voice shaking with fury. "You don't even know what I want, Dad. You just want everything to stay like it was when Mom was alive. But I'm not her. I want to live. Not keep a graveyard alive." And then she left. The journal had sat beneath the dust of 15 silent years. Until now. Walt opened it and began to write again. The first line in over a decade. "Sweetheart, I met a horse, and I think he understands me better than I ever understood myself." The next morning, Bo brought news. Someone in the next town over, down by the old blacksmith shop, had been talking about a Mustang mare found shot near Birch Creek at the end of summer. Folks hadn't bothered looking for the foal, assuming it wouldn't make it. Lady named Mavis said she saw the mare circling her dead mother over and over. Then she just disappeared. Walt sat on the porch steps, eyes focused on Dusty, who was chewing grass in the soft morning light. "He's an orphan," Walt said softly. "Like me." When Ellie left, Bo stayed quiet. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "You think Ellie will ever come back?" Walt gave a short, dry laugh and didn't answer. But Bo knew. If the question could be asked, it meant it had never left Walt's heart. That evening, Walt called the town vet. Not because Dusty needed saving anymore, but because he wanted to do it right. Mara Lee arrived just before sundown. She was in her 60s, her salt and pepper hair tied up neatly, voice steady but kind, the kind of person you trust even before they speak. "That's him?" she asked, eyes widening as Dusty stepped from the stall. Walt nodded. "Good Lord, he's alive, and beautiful," she whispered. She examined Dusty right there in the yard. Her calloused hands moved gently along his legs, chest, and ribs. Dusty didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He stood still, as if recognizing kindness. "It's a miracle," Mara said quietly. "How did you do it?" "I was just there," Walt replied, his gaze never leaving Dusty. After giving vaccines and jotting notes, she sat on the porch beside Walt. They looked out across the field as sunset lit the tops of the trees in fading gold. "You still writing in that journal?" she asked. "I started again," Walt said, then paused. "For Ellie." Myra didn't look at him, only said softly, "No word still? No letter, no call. 15 years. They sat there a long time in silence, just the wind and the soft sound of Dusty shifting his weight behind them. "You ever wonder," Myra said gently, "if you were to go, who would tell Dusty?" Walt turned his head. Their eyes met, then he looked away. "I think he'd know. Long before I hit the ground." Myra nodded and stood up, brushing off her jeans. "I'll come back every month. And anyway, I owe you a free checkup," she smiled. "Also, I kind of miss your cornbread." Walt chuckled, quietly. "That was my wife's recipe. I just kept the fire going." "Same way you kept that horse alive," she replied, walking back to her truck. Walt watched her disappear into the trees. Dusty approached, brushing his head gently against Walt's arm. He looked down and murmured, "You know something, Dusty. I don't know which of us saved who, but if you need me to keep living, I will." For the first time, Dusty let out a soft, low whinny. And Walt, the man who believed he was too old for hope, felt something stir in his chest. Not sorrow, but something beginning to beat again. Winter came early to Red Bluff, as if the mountain winds had run out of patience. Cold air spilled down from the Cascades, slicing through the valley like razor blades. Walt's hens puffed up their feathers and huddled in the corners of the coop, while Dusty stood with one leg tucked close to his body near the warming stove inside the old stall Walt had reinforced with canvas and sealed against drafts. Inside the house, Walt nursed a mug of hot tea with one hand and pressed the other against his chest, where sharp, cat-like claws of pain came in short, slicing waves. He knew this feeling. His heart was sending out warnings. That morning, as he tried lifting a sack of winter seed onto the porch, the pain clamped down hard on his chest, stealing his breath and dropping him to the cold ground. He rolled to his side, gasping, clutching the edge of the steps to stay upright. No one was around. No one, except Dusty. The Mustang let out a piercing whinny, then began pacing the stall in tight circles, kicking the walls with frantic force. Hooves thudded against wood, head butting the door, a storm of sound crashing through the quiet. And not long after, Bo appeared, on his way to deliver some winter turnips. Startled by the racket, he rushed in and froze when he saw Walt slumped against the step, pale and breathless. "What happened?" Bo cried, voice rising in panic. "I'm fine," Walt rasped, the pain still raw. "Just a warning shot." "We need a doctor." "No," Walt said firmly, struggling to rise, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. "I'm not going anywhere." Bo helped him onto the chair. Dusty was still whinnying softly from the stall, eyes locked on the door, as if waiting for it to swing open, ready to bolt through. That night, Walt lay in bed, the pain dulled to a lingering ache, like a boulder pressing into his chest. He stared at the ceiling, reached for his journal, but instead pulled out a clean sheet of paper. The letter began with 3 words, "Ellie, sweetheart." His handwriting was shakier now, but each line felt carved from stone, words of apology, regret, and truths he had never dared to say. That he was wrong to make her live in the image of her mother. That he should have mourned with her, not built walls of silence around their pain. "I don't have much time, Ellie, but if you're reading this, know that I never stopped thinking about you. And if anything kept me alive this long, it's you. And a horse." He folded the letter, slid it into an envelope and wrote her name on the front. Ellie McKinley. No address, no number, just the name. He handed it to Bo and asked him to take it to the post office and request they hold it in case someone ever came to claim it. But before Bo could leave, Dusty walked out of the stall. No one knew how the door, always latched, had come open. The Mustang stepped to the front gate and with his nose gently nudged it open, as if understanding the paper in Bo's hand needed to reach far beyond this valley. Bo stood still, letter in hand. "You think he knows?" he asked. Walt didn't answer. He just nodded, soft and sure. A few days later, Walt called the town's lawyer, Mr. Hayden. "I want to write a will," Walt said. Hayden raised an eyebrow. "You seem fine. Too fine to keep pretending." Walt smiled. "I'm leaving this land to Dusty, and whoever can love him the way I did gets the rest." Hayden shook his head, half laughing, half stunned. But he took his pen and followed Walt's instructions. "If no blood relatives show up," he said while scribbling, "Dusty might become the first legal landowner in Red Bluff with 4 hooves." Walt only smiled. One gray morning, drizzle hung in the air like a curtain between earth and sky. Walt sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, hands shaking as he held his tea. Dusty stood a few steps away, ears tilted toward him like they could catch even unspoken thoughts. "Maybe she'll never come back," Walt said quietly, as if hoping the wind would carry it off. "But if she knows you're here, Dusty, maybe." His voice faded, a low, cracked note beneath the breeze that tugged at the trees. Dusty stepped closer, rested his head on Walt's shoulder. "Don't look at me like that," Walt murmured, still staring toward the road. "I'm not going anywhere yet." The Mustang didn't move, just let out a deep exhale, soft and low, as if from somewhere deep in its bones. They stood in silence in the mist, sharing a stillness that needed no words. That night, Walt couldn't sleep. He lit the fire, opened his wife's old keepsake box, and inside was the last family photo. A young Walt, Joanna, and little Ellie hugging their golden retriever, Rusty, all 3 smiling. He stared at it for a long time, then leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the firelight flicker across the worn lines of his face. The room was quiet, eerily so. Not the silence of death, but of something pulling away softly. Outside, Dusty remained awake. He stood by the window, eyes glowing in the faint light, as if guarding the soul of someone who had kept watch over him first. That morning in Red Bluff, the sky held no clouds. The air was windless and dull, as if a faded gray sheet had been draped across the valley. No one could explain the hush that settled over everything. Birds didn't sing, the breeze didn't stir, even the stray dogs that usually barked at dawn fell silent. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Bo arrived at Walt's house like he always did, carrying a bag of feed for Dusty and a few loaves of bread from the county market. He pushed open the gate and called out, "Mr. Walt, I brought you fresh rolls." No answer. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked open with a groan. In the small living room, the old armchair still sat by the fireplace, the wool blanket neatly folded across the back. And Walt, he was sitting there, head tilted slightly, eyes gently closed, like he'd just dozed off. But within a few steps, Bo knew. He wasn't breathing. Bo froze. Then slowly stepped forward, trembling, and reached for his shoulder. "Mr. Walt?" No response. From the back, Dusty suddenly let out a piercing whinny. The sound echoed through the air like a bell tolling in a silent church. Bo turned toward the stall. The Mustang's eyes were locked on the window, where the curtain fluttered in the returning breeze. Bo steadied himself and called Mara Lee. She arrived within 30 minutes. She stepped into the room, didn't need to check his pulse, just gave a small nod. Her eyes dimmed. Her hand rested on his shoulder with a quiet goodbye that didn't need words. They didn't call an ambulance. Walt had been clear. "When I go, let me stay home. I don't want flashing lights or sirens, just a man going quiet in his own place." Bo and Myra made the arrangements. They closed the blinds, lit the lanterns, and laid him on the bed in his old clothes. The faded brown shirt, the patched jeans, and those worn-down leather boots. The entire town came to pay respects over the next 2 days. Everyone brought their own memories of Walt McKinley, the reclusive old man with a kind heart, the one who once saved kids from a wildfire, who once buried a deer hit by a car, because you don't leave something like that lying in the road like trash. No one wept loudly. They stood in silence, removed their hats, and whispered goodbyes like they might wake him if they spoke too loud. The funeral was held in the pasture behind the house. A simple pine coffin, draped in the hand-woven blanket Joanna had once knit, was laid among the grass he and Dusty had walked each morning. Dusty was locked in the stall. Bo hated it, but Mara insisted. "He might panic," she said. "There'll be hundreds of people. We don't know what he might do." Bo looked into Dusty's pleading eyes. The Mustang paced the stall, ears twitching, eyes sharp and restless. It knew. As the coffin was carried out, Dusty began to stomp. At first, the hoofbeats were soft, then louder. He whinnied, rose onto his hind legs, and slammed his head against the stall door. Bo could feel the thuds in his chest. "Oh God," he whispered. Despite Mara's protests, Bo moved toward the stall. But before he could unhook the latch, Dusty delivered a kick so powerful it tore the hinges off. The door flew open. The Mustang bolted into the field like a storm. The crowd scattered. People parted like water, stunned, as Dusty thundered through the grass. Dirt kicked up in waves under his hooves. He didn't slow. He charged straight to the coffin. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" Too late. Dusty halted beside the coffin. He let out a cry, raw, trembling, full of something no one could name. He circled it once, then suddenly raised a hoof and struck the lid. A dry crack echoed out. Wood splintered. "Dusty, no!" Mara yelled, rushing forward. But Dusty didn't stop. He struck again, once, twice, 3 times. Each blow felt like a hammer against everyone's chest. Wood cracked, breath hitched, even the wind seemed to pause. Bo lunged forward to pull him back, but Dusty tilted his head. His eyes shimmered with something strange, not madness, something like intent. And from the hairline fracture in the coffin came a sound, a cry, faint, but unmistakably, a child. The world went still. Mara staggered forward, heart thudding. She leaned over the crack, pressing her ear close. The crowd was dead silent, every breath held. "There's someone in there," she shouted. Bo pulled back, waving over 2 men. Together, they pried the lid open, and inside, cradled in Walt's arms, was a tiny girl. Her eyes were shut, cheeks pale but warm with life. She whimpered, then let out a soft sob. Her tiny hands reached into the air, searching. Mara gasped, "Oh my God, it's a baby." No one moved. Dusty stepped back, his flanks rising with heavy breaths, then lowered his head toward the child, as if delivering a mission completed. Bo stared at the baby, then at Walt. His arms still curved gently, holding her, as though in his final moments he'd wrapped her in all the warmth left in him. This is Ivy," Myra whispered, pulling a small photo clutched in the girl's hand. On the back was written, "Ellie McKinley. Gave birth to daughter Ivy, age 2. Bo dropped to his knees. Tears came freely. Walt hadn't died alone. He had passed holding the last piece of his heart. And Dusty, the once abandoned Mustang, was the one who had brought them all back from the edge of despair. News of the child found alive inside Walt McKinley's coffin swept through Red Bluff by nightfall. From elderly farmers at Doyle's Cafe to high school kids just off the school bus, everyone was talking about Walt, but this time not as the strange old man who lived with a wild horse. Now, he was something more, a symbol, a man who held death close just long enough to protect the last living piece of his family. Ivy, the baby discovered during the funeral, was taken to the local clinic that same evening. Dr. Carlton, who had delivered most of the town's children over the past 3 decades, gave a statement. "She's a miracle. In those temperatures, no child should have survived, but Walt's body kept her warm. God bless that man." That night, Myra sat in silence for hours, her eyes hollow, as though she'd lost more than just a friend. Bo didn't say much either. He sat on Walt's porch beside Dusty, the Mustang still as a statue, head slightly bowed, eyes full of storms from some other lifetime. "Bo," Myra said softly, handing him a stack of papers. "You need to see this." It was a traffic report from an accident on Timber Ridge a few weeks prior. A woman had died. No ID, no wallet, just a handwritten note folded in her coat. "If anything happens, please take the girl to Walt McKinley, Red Bluff." Bo stared at it, eyes widening. "Ellie," he whispered. Myra nodded. She was trying to come back. The story shattered piece by piece, like a mirror of the past being reassembled by shaking hands. Ellie, the daughter who had once vanished in grief, had tried to return, but the accident took her before she could reach her father's door. All that remained was her child, Ivy, and a note that carried everything she'd run from and everything she hoped to return to. Walt had never said a word. Maybe he'd found Ivy lost in the night, with his own heart already giving out. Maybe he hadn't even known for sure she was his granddaughter. Maybe he just felt it. 3 days after the funeral, Bo and Myra brought Ivy back to the little house. It was empty, but not cold. The kitchen still smelled faintly of mint tea, the living room still held the book Walt had left open on the armchair, and on the table, his journal. Myra flipped to the first page. His handwriting, shaky but full of warmth. "To my daughter, if you're reading this, I may no longer be here. But know this. I didn't leave this world without loving you. I only got to live one life, but I loved you in all the lives I could have lived." Bo swallowed hard and stepped out to the backyard, where Dusty stood near the fence, his head turned toward the ridge, still, like he was guarding the space between pain and peace. Bo gently stroked Dusty's neck. "You knew, didn't you?" The horse didn't respond, but his eyes flicked toward the house, toward the room where Ivy was sleeping now. In the same cradle Ellie had once rested in as a baby. That night Bo couldn't sleep. He poured himself coffee and sat back on the porch. The lamp cast a warm light on the fog rolling in. Dusty still stood at the window of the bedroom. Bo walked over and sat beside him. "You know, I used to think only people had memories, but maybe some horses are born to remember for the rest of us." Dusty stepped a little closer, sniffed Bo's open palm, then turned his head skyward. Bo followed his gaze. Above Red Bluff, stars glittered like tiny promises. One star shot across the sky, and though he couldn't explain why, Bo felt certain Dusty had just said goodbye to something. The next morning, Myra returned with a large basket filled with milk, bread, and a few old dolls. Ivy sat quietly in Bo's lap, tiny fingers clutching his shirt collar. "She doesn't cry anymore," Myra said softly. "She feels safe now," Bo replied. "Maybe she knows someone's keeping watch." Dusty stood nearby by the window. As always, Myra knelt and kissed Ivy's forehead. "We need to decide what comes next for her." Bo nodded, but his eyes remained on Dusty. "I have a suggestion." Myra waited. "We raise her, you and me, if you don't mind." Myra blinked. "I'm no mother," she said quietly. "You don't have to be," Bo smiled. "Just someone who stays." They fell silent. Ivy shifted in Bo's lap and gave a little laugh, a sound small but powerful enough to shake every silent thing in the house. Myra nodded. "All right." Together they looked toward Dusty, the Mustang who had once walked the edge of death and now stood as the guardian of a home that nearly crumbled. That afternoon, Bo carried Ivy onto the porch. Dusty approached, lowered his head gently. Ivy, with the innocence only a child could possess, reached out and touched his muzzle. Dusty stayed still. Then slowly he bent his front knees, bowing. Bo and Myra stood frozen. A horse doesn't bow, not unless trained. But Dusty, he bowed because he knew. Something sacred had begun. A circle had closed, and something new had just begun to open. Spring returned to Red Bluff, down the narrow path that cut through the old pine ridge, bringing the scent of sap and fresh life. The pasture behind Walt's farm, where the strangest funeral the town had ever witnessed had taken place, was now lush with new grass. The trees whispered with old songs, and meadowlarks returned to the roof of the wooden stall, chirping like nothing had ever died here. Only something had been reborn. Ivy stayed. No one questioned it. She was the last living thread of a man the whole town once thought of as a ghost, but now remembered with reverence. Walt McKinley, the grumpy old hermit who lived with a Mustang, was now a legend. Bo and Myra officially adopted Ivy on a Monday morning, witnessed by Judge Elizabeth Crowley at the county courthouse. Dusty stood outside, peering through the window like a silent witness. After the ceremony, Ivy, with her soft curls and dimples, ran out and wrapped her arms around Dusty's neck. The Mustang lowered his head gently to meet her. "She treats him like a living stuffed animal," Myra chuckled. "No," Bo said. "He's the one who guards her dreams." From that day on, the townsfolk got used to seeing a little girl riding bareback on Dusty through Main Street. No saddle, no reins. Just Ivy clutching his mane and Dusty walking slow and steady like a silent guardian. He never spooked, not at cars, barking dogs, or screaming kids behind the school fence. He was patience made flesh, and a love that defied every boundary. One morning, Mr. Doyle, the cafe owner on the corner, asked Bo as he picked up his coffee, "You think that horse knows everything it's done?" Bo glanced out the window at Dusty under the oak tree, Ivy napping curled on his back. "I don't think he knows the way we do," Bo said. "But I believe his heart remembers, probably clearer than any of us." Old folks in town told the funeral story to children, each with their own spin. Some said Dusty was a spirit animal. Others claimed he'd been secretly trained. A few shook their heads. "No, he's just a horse, but one with a heart bigger than this town." Bo never argued. All he knew was, since that day, Ivy had never had a nightmare, and Dusty had never slept more than 6 feet away from her. When Ivy turned 5, she started asking questions. "Uncle Bo, who was Mr. Walt? He was your grandpa, a quiet man, but brave. Was he scared?" Bo paused. "Yes, but he didn't let fear stop him from holding you when it mattered most." "What about my mom?" Myra often went quiet at that one, but one evening, Ivy sat in her lap drawing a field full of sunlight and horses and asked, "Was my mom like me?" Myra nodded, lips pressed tight. "Very much, and you have her most important trait." "What's that?" "A brave heart." Ivy didn't say anything. She smiled and turned to hug Dusty, who by now had grown visibly older. The hair around his eyes had grayed, but his steps were still soft and sure. He didn't run anymore. But Ivy didn't need to go anywhere fast. Each year on the anniversary of Walt's passing, the whole town gathered at the old farm. They brought cakes, flowers, and stories. Ivy, dressed in a simple white dress, would read aloud from Walt's journal, the part he wrote for Ellie in his final days. Then she'd place a white daisy on the small stone that read, "Walt McKinley, guardian of souls, sower of life." Next to it stood a smaller stone, "Ellie McKinley, daughter." Mother, the one who returned Dusty, always stood nearby. No rope, no command, just present. Eyes watchful, like a sentinel between generations. That summer when Ivy turned 9, Bo rebuilt the stall. Myra told him, "Don't call it a stall anymore, call it Dusty's house." So he did. A small cabin made of pine wood with a porch and a window. Inside hung a photo of Walt in a handmade frame surrounded by Ivy's crayon drawings, each one showing an old man and a horse. On the night of the housewarming, Ivy leaned into Dusty's side and whispered, "I'll build another house for Grandpa Walt, inside my heart." Dusty blinked, then gently lowered his head to hers and sighed. At 12, Ivy wrote an essay that won first place in a statewide contest. Love doesn't need words, but it's always heard. It told the story of Dusty and Walt, and of a funeral that turned into a beginning. The essay was published in a state journal. Interview requests followed. Ivy agreed on one condition: they can ask me anything, but I won't go anywhere without Dusty. One evening, now a quiet young woman, Ivy rode Dusty across the field. She didn't speak. She just let the wind move through her hair, through her dress, through the spaces left by time. Dusty didn't gallop, but he still walked, steady. "Grandpa Walt," Ivy whispered, "I think I understand now. Some cries aren't for endings. They're for starting everything over again." And the old Mustang, once abandoned like a broken thing, kept walking into the setting sun, carrying the breath of 2 generations now gone and guiding a new one forward. Because some souls need no words, only wind, and a place to be remembered. If you believe that sometimes the deepest kind of love needs no words, just a glance or the stomp of a hoof, drop a 1 in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed a moment of rebirth between a human and an animal that left you speechless, comment 0. And if the journey of Ivy, Walt, and Dusty moved you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next story where love, memory, and life are always told through the eyes of souls that can never be tamed.